good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm speaking to you from Tel Aviv, and just in the last hour or so, we've had a significant change. The Home Front commanders instructed everybody in the heart of Israel to stay close to the safe rooms, and this is because of what appears to be an Iranian attack on the immediate horizon. But I want to talk to you probably for the next 10 or 20 minutes about how we got here, where we are, and perhaps where we're going. And of course, I think the most important point of reference is the year that has passed. On the 8th of October, Hezbollah launched its first rocket attack against Israel. In that time, and since that time, Hezbollah has conducted a vast spectrum of different types of attacks. Over 9,500 rockets, missiles, and drones. Cross-border sniper fire. We had 7 attempts to infiltrate from Lebanon into Israel, into northern Israel. All of these, and the trend that we found in the beginning of the war since last October, forced Israel, of course, to evacuate some 60,000 Israelis out of the area of the close perimeter of 5 kilometers belt along the border between Israel and Lebanon, and effectively turn all of the communities. There are some 20 or so communities, including the town of Kiryat Shmona and the kibbutzim and the villages across the border, into ghost towns. Very, very limited presence on the ground, only security personnel and essential staff that have to keep businesses like livestock businesses up and running. And so when the situation is, and throughout the course of the year, as the military focus was extensively on Hamas in Gaza, and as that and throughout the course of the year, there has been a huge attempt on behalf of diplomacy, and effectively the US took the lead role. Amos Hochstein was doing the shuttle diplomacy between Israel, Lebanon, and within the region and beyond, in order to try and create some sort of ceasefire and to enable Israelis to go back home. 2 weeks ago, the government decided that enough is enough. 2 weeks ago, Israeli government instructed the IDF to change the situation on the ground and create the conditions to restore safety and security, and to permit the 60,000 Israelis to go back home in the north of Israel. And since then, we've seen a series of IDF operations, a series of operations that have taken from the most senior leaders of Hezbollah. Of course, you've all heard about the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah, but basically all of his chain of command, all of his senior advisors, all have been targeted, eliminated across the board from the extensive leaders of the most senior echelons of his war effort, but also the political leaders, the research and development leaders, taking out systematically those that dictate the terms and conditions of how Hezbollah has fought and built its force, and conduct resource allocation, training. They've all been taken out in a huge disruption of Hezbollah's ability to operate. Of course, we need to address also the level of operational commanders, so those that are the mid-level, those that are, I would say, commanders of battalions, or the equivalent of battalions, the equivalent of brigade-level commanders that have a more territorial position, a more instrumental and effective role in managing the battlefield. And finally, the operators themselves, those that plan to infiltrate, the Radwan force, which is Hezbollah's special forces, the forces that have undergone extensive training. They have been equipped and supported by Iran extensively, and of course also participated in the civil war in Syria in the last 10 years, and conducted an experienced battle in the field. So we have decapitated, but also undermined and disrupted Hezbollah's ability to operate. For context, when we historically, for the last 15 years, considered war and how war with Hezbollah would look like, the fundamental understanding was that Hezbollah would have the upper hand on day one. They would initiate the war, like they did in 2006, or like Hamas did on October 7th of last year. In that scenario, the IDF estimated that some 4,000 rockets, missiles, and drones would be fired per day at Israel. As we can see over the last week, 10 days now, that has not been realized precisely because Israel has taken the initiative. Israel has been able to undermine and disrupt Hezbollah's capability to operate against us, his capability to organize effective command chain of effective operations. It doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to fire synchronized rocket fires. But when our Air Force went in and took out the three different levels, the level of the command, the level of the commanders, and also the level of the strategic tools that Hezbollah, has accumulated over the last 20 years, which some estimates suggest as much as 200,000 rockets, missiles, and drones. So we were taking out the most strategic weapons, the precision-guided weapons, those that have coast-to-sea capabilities. So from launched from within buildings to potentially to the gas rigs or to the coastal cities, or even into the heart of the country. All of these things are on our battle plan and have been on the battle plan since the beginning of the war. We've been conducting both implementation of our meticulous plan in a way which I believe has set Hezbollah back a generation, even if we just stop now. We have no intention on stopping now, but I think it's important to note. The understanding, though, is that the type of battle that we are facing up until the early hours of this morning was standoff, was precision strikes, intelligence-based, based on the operations that we needed to conduct in order to undermine their ability to counterstrike us, in order to undermine their ability to regroup as a leadership, as the commanders, as the operational leadership. And that, I think, up until this morning was the heart of the operations, coupled with the hot interception of terrorists that were actually planning to implement more rocket fire or potential cross-border attacks constantly. So we're currently implementing this type of policy. And this morning we began a new stage in the effort against Hezbollah. But it didn't happen in a void. The launch of the ground operations that I'm sure you all have questions about is in the aftermath of an extensive 7 or 8 months covert operations that have been conducted inside Lebanon, in the close proximity of the border, in and around and against locations where Hezbollah was planning to use as staging grounds and proximity, close proximity launch pads, launching spaces to attack and infiltrate into Israel. So if we look at what we found, and we've distributed the information, I'm sure ELNET can distribute the announcement and share with you the vast amount of materials that we found. We understand that what we saw on the 7th of October was actually crafted and designed by Hezbollah. We know that because in 2015, they actually published their plan to conquer the Galilee. And not only did they create a plan, they actually turned that plan into actionable items by building their force, by training their force, and pre-positioning across the border from east to west, from locations like Kifr Kile, all the way down to the coast, and anything in between. So in the operations, in the covert operations, we conducted tens and hundreds of ground operations with special forces that went into Lebanon, sought out and found these locations, breached into them, gathered intelligence, confiscated weaponry, and destroyed the infrastructure that was being used, the attack infrastructure that Hezbollah was using. What we did this morning, effectively, was take the ground forces and began a ground operation in the close proximity of the border, intended on expanding on what we had experienced in these covert operations. So our working assumption is that we didn't find everything. And therefore, in order to safeguard the north of Israel, in order to create the conditions so that Israelis can go back home in the north of Israel, those 60,000 Israelis that have been evacuated, we have begun a ground operation in the close proximity. It is intelligence-based, but we understand that there is developing intelligence as the operation is ongoing. So that is currently happening today, since the early hours of this morning, and we can expect this to go on for several days. I expect that we will see more infrastructure exposed to the world, just to show how Hezbollah, how extensive Hezbollah capabilities of crafting and designing, not by mistake, but intentionally as a strategy, putting access points to tunnels where terrorists could congregate, then go down into the tunnel, arm themselves, suit up, get their weapons, get their explosive devices, get their anti-tank missiles, and then storm into Israel. This is what we've found over the course of the last several months, but in more so today, this morning, this is what we expect to continue to find and continue to see over the next few days. I want to comment briefly on what is just breaking now here in Israel. I think that is extremely important to focus on and understand that after effectively defeating Hamas so that they cannot conduct attacks against us like the October 7th, and after decapitating Hezbollah in such an effective way, and undermining and disrupting and destroying much of its strategic capabilities, tactical capabilities, and operational capabilities, what we are seeing today is an escalation that we had expected on one hand, prepared for it on the other, but also maintained an aspiration that it would not be realized. What has happened in the last hour and a half is we've been informed by our American allies that they've identified that Iran is planning to launch rockets, ballistic missiles towards Israel. And so the Israeli public now have been informed. Our role as IDF spokesperson's unit is to inform the public so that we are not surprised, so that we can behave accordingly. And indeed, in the last 2 hours, we've updated the Homefront Command instructions so that people don't congregate en masse, so that there are a limited amount of people that can be outside at once and inside in safe places. And in the last hour or so, in the last half an hour, everybody in the center of Israel basically has received a text message saying, stay close to your safe room, to your shelter. So we don't want people roaming around. We don't want people out in the streets. We want people to be attentive to our instructions. And we'll be making the necessary announcements to the people and to the public as the situation develops. I could say that we haven't identified any launch so far from Iran towards Israel. We haven't, but we have put our aerial defenses, of course, on top alert, on high alert, in order to identify and intercept any threat that comes in. Our Air Force are patrolling the sky as well. And of course, all the while, we see an ongoing flow of rockets and missiles that are being fired from Hezbollah in Lebanon towards Israel. And maybe I'll just finish on one note, and I think that this is also important to understand where we are. Yesterday, the IDF conducted a strike against the Houthis in Yemen. It was an extraordinary effort. It's not the first time we've done it, but we traveled with our aircrafts, with our fighter jets, over 1,800 kilometers in distance and conducted a strike. I think that what we're trying to say here, first of all, to the Houthis, if you attack us, we will attack you back and you will pay for attacking us. They've increased and they've continued to launch ballistic missiles and cruise missiles towards Israel. Sorry, not ballistic missiles, the cruise missiles towards Israel. And of course, that's unacceptable. And when it happens, it's happened a couple of times, including towards Tel Aviv and to Eilat, and that is unacceptable. and to the heart of Israel. And so we will send a very, very clear message and strike them back. But more importantly is that Iran and Tehran specifically need to understand that those striking powers, the striking power that we have, is not unique to Gaza, not unique to Lebanon and Hezbollah, but they can reach Iran if we need to. We've not, as I said, not aspired to that. We did not try to reach confrontation with Iran. What we're trying to achieve is dismantling Hamas as a governing authority, a terrorist entity in the Gaza Strip so that they cannot pose a threat like October 7th, and to bring home the Israelis that want to go back home so much in the north of Israel. So, as I said, 60,000 Israelis, that is completely unacceptable, that for a year, out of concern for them, still are out of home. And so our message is very clear. It's a message of resolve, of determination. And also, I think that in the last 2 weeks, we've seen an amazing ability of the IDF, especially when we are the initiating party and engaging and taking the initiative to strike deep, strong, and crippling in many ways against our enemies. I think, yeah, that's 17 minutes. I wanted to give a brief talk. I'm sure you have many questions, and I'm happy to take any questions as you see fit. Thank you, Yossi.
Okay, you can raise your hand for the questions. Please, Daniel, check who wants to ask a question. During the time you are doing that, I would like to ask the first question, Peter. Since most of the missiles are located in villages in South Lebanon, how can the IDF neutralize those missiles without a wider entrance of ground forces? Is the plan to really enter with a full army inside Lebanon?
No, we have no intention of going to Beirut or even going to the cities in the south of Lebanon. The idea currently of the ground operations is very, very focused across the border area to limit the ability to launch direct attacks on Israel. We have good confidence in our ability, in our aerial defense capabilities. We are extremely, I think, determined to make sure that the stipulation of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701, that Hezbollah does not have weapons or presence in the south of the Litani River, is implemented. Yossi, I think that the situation, of course, is dynamic. We could find ourselves in a much deeper situation, but that is not what we're planning. We're planning to create a safe zone for Israelis to go home, so that they do not have the looming threat of an incursion, an infiltration by Hezbollah terrorists into their houses, into the kibbutzim, into the communities.
Thank you. I see that MP Jim Shannon is raising his hand. Please, Jim. You're on mute. You're on mute, Jim.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, first of all, Yossi, nice to see you as well. And Peter in particular, you and our engagement with you just after Easter, you were very clear and very honest, and we appreciate that. I think it'd only be right that we should start by congratulating the IDF and the Israeli government and the steps that they've taken to protect their people. The targeting of Hezbollah and Lebanon and the leadership, the ammunition dumps, the missile places as well, is all very, very important. Also important that Iran understands that their influence in the Middle East can be reduced by the destruction of Hezbollah and also of Hamas. A number of questions to ask. Yossi, not be surprised if I have questions. Always had questions when I was there in the visit, and the same questions to Peter again. The excursion into Lebanon will hopefully ensure a buffer zone. I think that's really what we're saying. What you're saying. Does that mean that would be a buffer zone occupied by? I hope I'm able to ask these questions. If we can't answer these questions, I'll understand. Okay. So when it comes to a buffer zone, will that ensure that Hezbollah can't enter that buffer zone, and yet the distance that is necessary for the Israelis to return home, that they'll be able to do so? Will I asked him in the fort one time, is that okay, Peter? Will the IDF continue to target missiles attacks from Hezbollah and Lebanon further and beyond the buffer zone? Because I think it's important that it does continue. Thirdly, are Hamas beaten? In the press back home here, provincially, back in Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, they indicate that Hamas are beaten. Again, if they are, what does that mean? And the fourth thing, which is really important, and again, being constructive in my questions, I always try to be, we can win the war, and I'm no doubt whatsoever they will win the war, but you then have to win the peace. And perhaps maybe looking forward, what will that entail? What will that mean? And indeed, how will it be achieved? Hopefully those aren't too taxing of questions, but I think it's really important that we have a better idea. And by the way, thank God for all that the IDF and our government, your government do. Well done. Well done.
Thank you, sir. Very, very good, relevant questions, all relevant. So regard to the buffer zone, there is no intention to establish a buffer zone. The intention is to clear out all of the infrastructure that Hezbollah has established across the border. And at the same time, in the course of this war, we are conducting strikes against their operatives, so that the price, the motivation that they pay is extremely high. And so that is, I'd say that is the current policy. Of course, things can change. The second component that you asked about, of course, we will continue to intercept and strike rockets, rocket arsenals, rocket caches, rocket launchers, multiple launch rocket systems, wherever they are throughout Lebanon. Much of their strategic capabilities were actually not necessarily in the south, but rather in the Bekaa Valley in the northeast of Lebanon, and some of them in Beirut as well. So for instance, we conducted extensive strikes against three compounds where coast to sea, they had a huge arsenal of coast to sea guided missiles in the bottom floor of these buildings. And so we sought them out, had good intelligence. We've been, and I would say this is the war that Israel has been planning for since 2006, to be prepared. And so the amount of intelligence, the knowledge, the understanding, as illustrated in the precision strike against Nasrallah himself and his jihad council that were with him, just illustrates the level of intelligence penetration combined with operational capability was able to take him out. With regard to Hamas, is Hamas beaten? So I think we need to talk on two different levels. Of course, their military capabilities today are almost non-existent. We see very little ability to organize any sort of major attack. They're working maximum in pairs, nothing more than that. We've seen almost an inability to launch any types of rockets, missiles, drones towards Israel from Gaza. And I would say they are also in a situation, a dire situation, where they cannot effectively rule the Gaza Strip. It does not mean that there are not attempts to reestablish power, control. We've seen reports of them trying to regroup in the north for their governing issues, to try and govern the Gaza Strip, in the north of Gaza Strip. So it's the war is not over in the Gaza Strip. We still have two divisions operating inside Gaza. We have the third division on the peripheral areas conducting operations and penetrating operations, ambushes in and around the peripheral areas across the perimeter of the fence. But I think what we need when we talk about defeating Hamas, I think the most important thing is to say very loud and clear. Today, they're unable to conduct an October 7th type of attack, but there needs to be an alternative, of course. The final Okay. The final component.
Winning the peace.
Yeah, the final component. Will we win the peace? I think, I'm a hopeless optimist. I'd say we have no other choice. I think that this war can be a war that opens so many doors in the region, beyond the region. Of course, that is beyond the purview of the IDF or a reservist in the IDF. But we all need to hope for that and aspire for that and hope that our leadership will deliver that type of message. I'm just getting a message that I have to, unfortunately, cut short, but because of operational concerns. I'm willing to take one or two more questions, and then I have to go down.
Okay, so the next question is from Karlis Bukowskis. Please unmute yourself.
Makara.
Karlis? Okay, so we're going to take the question.
He says his mic is not working, so I'll ask the question for him. Could you please provide an update on the current status of the Israeli hostages in Gaza?
Thank you for the question. Of course, the hostages remain the most important issue for Israeli society. 101 hostages remain in the clutches of Hamas due to Hamas's inability or unwillingness to come to a deal. Israel went great lengths in order to create those conditions to bring them home within negotiations, but unfortunately, that has not been realized. We're operating on the ground to create intelligence and increase the pressure to try and seek out, find, and kill Yahya Sinwar. We are clearing the floor here. Yossi, I'm going to have to go. I am really sorry, guys.
We understand.
For this. Shalom, toda, and Shana Tova to everybody. Happy New Year to those celebrating.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you very much all for joining us. We will do briefings again with the IDF I hope in the next weeks, depending on the situation. Daniel, you wanted to update? I think there was a terror attack just under your flat right now.
Yes, just a small, tiny feeling of our reality right here. The train station I use every day to go to and from work has just been attacked by two terrorists with automatic rifles just under my apartment. I can still hear the police and the army, right? Trying to sorry?
In Tel Aviv.
In Tel Aviv, yeah, in the south part of Tel Aviv. There are several casualties. It's a very big incident. It's still ongoing. It is not over yet, but this is part of our reality. We're bracing both for ballistic missiles from Iran, but terrorist attacks under our homes as well. So I've locked my door, but that's part of what we're living here on a daily basis.
Thank you, Daniel. David, you wanted to give a few words of closing?
No, of course. First of all, Daniel and all our team members in Israel, please stay safe. The latest reports are that both terrorists were killed now, so it should be over, Daniel, and you're in your neighborhood. But I think there's another report of another attack in Tel Aviv as we speak. It's very clear that these are the fruit of the multi-front campaign that Iran is waging against Israel.
I have currently an alert from Iran.
And we have an alarm.